Hello everyone, this is that damn Pipsqueak bringing you coverage of Grand Prix Rome, MSEM's largest ever Grand Prix, with 44 players. This is round one, and we have Anna versus GenderTerrorist. Anna's on Jund Ramp, and GenderTerrorist is on Red-Black Discard Aggro / Madness. While GenderTerrorist won the die roll, there wasn't a turn 1 play, but there was a turn 2 Madcap Merc into discard Fiery Temper to kill a thing, which was a pretty sweet line. Anna, meanwhile, has just continued to ramp this entire time. Had a opening hand of 6 cards, which was just land, or I think 3 lands, Epic Encounter, Earthbreaker, and Farseek. So it's just gearing up, trying to land this Earthbreaker Behemoth. Meanwhile, the one lander that GenderTerrorist started with has really developed quite nicely. So I think from here I would expect to see Mountain, Slasher, discard Putrid Lurker, put Putrid Lurker into play, and then swing for 3, and then I don't think you're quite threatening lethal next turn, but you're going to be able to put on a lot of pressure. It looks like GenderTerrorist has lost connection to the game. Sometimes internets are not the most stable, but we'll probably be back fairly soon, so I wouldn't be worried. In terms of generally how I expect this matchup to go, I think it's really going to be dependent on can GenderTerrorist get underneath Anna. If Anna's able to stick a Earthbreaker, for instance, before GenderTerrorist really has a full board, while Anna still has a lot of life left to work with, that's going to be a problem, which is why it's so important for GenderTerrorist to get as much pressure on this turn as possible. Putrid Lurker, swing with Madcap Merc, get the Concealed Slasher in play, means that Anna's untapping into 4 mana with 15 life, and can drop down to 6 life before slamming the Earthbreaker, which that's really where you want to be. Well, where you want to be if you're GenderTerrorist, very much not where you want to be if you're Anna. So, I think that's the line I would take, but I'll be curious to see if that's not the line that GenderTerrorist takes. Anna thankfully already has the ability to turn off the damage that she's taking from this Rampant Summit, so that'll be really useful in the mid to long term. Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about GenderTerrorist connection, but they're still in voice chat, which means it should just be a matter of time in terms of rebooting and such. Alright. GenderTerrorist has managed to restore connection to the game, so I imagine we'll see things starting to get more underway. Yep. Mountain is played, and are we going to see the Concealed Slasher? Well, I guess that would be more of a post-combat thing. The other thing to consider is several of these players haven't really had time to test their deck set thoroughly, so especially with the ones with more complex lines, they might not know all of the ins and outs particularly well. Ooh, I actually really like this line, which is something I hadn't thought of, which is you don't actually need to get the Putrid Lurker out right now. You can get it in during Anna's end step, so Anna doesn't actually necessarily know how dangerous things are. Anna drawing this Pithwold is nice. Playing out this Timber Range is a little bit unfortunate, because that means this Rampant Summit's going to deal another 1 point of damage. So this is an attack for 8. Can potentially discard the Mountain to juice it up more. I probably wouldn't. I might be at the stage where I'd want to cycle the Unearth, but I guess it makes sense to hold on to just in case Anna has something like a Pithwold. Killing the Madcap Mercenary makes sense. It represents the most power currently on board, and it looks like there's going to be no Concealed Slasher activation, which again makes sense. I think continuing to hold up the ability to recur the Putrid Lurker, something happens to it, but not to Concealed Slasher, makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, I think that this Earthbreaker Behemoth is probably going to stabilize this board, since it can easily kill a creature and then, eat another inside combat. It looks like GenderTerrorist is currently deciding whether or not to unearth the Madcap Merc or hold it for something of a higher priority. And I think it's reasonable to not recur the Merc, but you're working with fairly limited resources, so I think that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, Behemoth is going to easily eat this Concealed Slasher. We might see a cycle just to see what's going on, but I guess also unearthing Concealed Slasher is pretty great because of the evasion. The other thing that's nice here is Putrid Lurker's Death Touch means that Anna's actually under a bunch of pressure still. And Fate Shaper plus Conceal... Oh, well, Fate Shaper plus Concealed Slasher doesn't work. Slightly unfortunate, because it's whenever a spell or ability causes you to discard one or more cards, so it doesn't proc off of costs to activate abilities such as Concealed Slasher. I think I would probably just attack with Putrid Lurker, offer the trade, see what Anna is leaning towards, especially because you can then recur the Putrid Lurker post-combat via discarding that mountain and to Concealed Slasher. Also, for that reason, I probably would be pretty tempted to not play at the mountain. I guess turning out off the Crumbling Precipice is deemed as important, which is justified. Putrid Lurker also can't block, so it's like you really might as well attack here. And we're seeing the Unearth for the Concealed Slasher. Doing that pre-combat is a little suspect. It doesn't have haste, and now your opponent knows that you can recur this Putrid Lurker. So they're even less incentivized to trade off. I'm curious what Anna has brought in her wish board, actually. Apologies if the video just distorted there as I pulled up Grand Prix Rome deck lists. So just playing out a bunch of superfluous blockers. Well, not superfluous, they are entirely relevant. Fate Shaper is nice here. It's a shame that Fate Shaper plus Concealed Slasher is not the wombo combo that I think GenderTerrorist thought it was. But as long as we don't see a premature scoop from Anna, that should become apparent very quickly. Pausing on the draw step is a little interesting. Okay. I feel like casting Concealed Slasher here would be a mistake. I think you really just want to discard it to this one and get in for a swing with these two and put your opponent on a 2-turn clock. Looks like there's a bit of hesitation. Maybe trying to decide that of, is this a game where I'm going to play out the second Concealed Slasher, or is it a game where I'm going to discard it for value? Checking Anna's sideboard really quickly, I think the only epic encounter target... There's no epic encounter target that feels suited for this board state. Attacking with a Fate Shaper here seems a little loose. Like, you don't really gain anything by doing that. Your opponent has to block this Putrid Lurker already and wants to do it with Keen's Devoted. Going down to 1 life versus 3 life doesn't actually matter, so they can just eat the Fate Shaper with the Earthbreaker Behemoth. So you just threw away a blocker. Which could actually cost her the game. If Anna... No, I lied. I was like, if Anna draws another land, we can see an epic encounter for a Cower Awoken. And then that's only 10 damage, so that's not lethal. But still, I think this just wasn't a necessary attack. That says can't be blocked. Oh, yep, that has been explained. I think the blocks are fairly easy. Kinds to Putrid, Earthbreaker to Fate Shaper. It's not like you even have to worry about a combat check. Your opponent's literally playing face up with 0 cards in hand. That's wrong. I'm sorry, but I am certain that is an incorrect block. What's the advantage of taking the Putrid Lurker off the table? What is in Anna's sideboard that I'm forgetting? Like, Sanjin doesn't do it. Zhang Mao doesn't do it. What's going on here? Like, I guess could Zhang Mao minus 3 get a 4-drop? But that doesn't do anything. Like, Hellion Devastator kill your... I guess Hellion Devastator kill your 3/2. You can't recur the Putrid Lurker. Yeah, that's fine. Fate Shaper can't attack in. Whereas I guess the Putrid Lurker could, but then you just trade off that turn. I feel like... Yeah, okay. So, we are going to see Zhang Mao the Intrepid. We are going to see probably the turning a Kind's Devoted into a Hellion Devastator to immediately kill the Slasher. And then Hellion Devastator just gets to sit on the back lines. I don't know. I'm uncertain how I feel about this line. Mostly because I can't see why this was better than just... Okay, so I guess the thing is, Anna's line only worked if they top decked a Zhang Mao there and still had both their Keen's Devoted. So, chump blocking the 3/1 would have had to happen, so that wouldn't have been okay. And then... But I mean, you're still... I don't know. This line does make sense. I've now figured it out. I do think it relied on knowing the top card of your deck, which Anna didn't actually know. So at this point, if you're Gender Terrorist, you're in a rough spot. You definitely want to keep extra lands in hand so you can discard them to looting effects. You just need to get in for 1 point. We're gonna, I think, start seeing the Rousing Rebel get fired up and swing in repeatedly. A 4 damage clock isn't anything to scoff at. Some hesitation, it appears. Attacking with the Hellion Devastator makes sense. The Rousing Rebel is the same amount of effectiveness on block, and you don't need to commit the mana if you don't need to commit the mana. But Distant Thunder top deck just means this game is done. Yep, 3 to the face, and there's nothing. Both players are hellbent, so there's no gotcha outs here. So moving on to sideboarding. I feel like Anna has a lot of tools to be competitive in sideboard games. Basically, Anna's entire sideboard is geared towards just beating the crap out of aggro decks, which, especially given how good the main deck is at beating up on aggro decks, that's very unfortunate. I imagine we'll see the Kalia's Abominations come out of Anna's decks. And apologies, I think this game I didn't do as great of a job of showing off the specific cards as I would have in other instances of casting, which I'll fix in the future. It's been a while since I've solo casted a game. So, I'm not sure exactly the outs that we'll see. I imagine this is not the matchup for Adarna. This doesn't seem like a good Kalia's Abomination matchup. This doesn't seem like a great Aduroth matchup, but I guess, hey, it can lock out your opponent's board once you have no cards in hands, which is kind of nice. I would want to bring in the Spore Flow Protectors, seem pretty good, but the Meteor Volleys and Stand Unsaleables seem better. Honestly, the main issue I have with trying to sideboard with Anna's deck is there's so many cards you want to bring in that I'm not sure which options are the best. Meanwhile, over on Gender Terrorist side, I think most of these cards are not for this matchup. Like, you don't want Chaos and Bloom here. Maybe you go with Deform Sandy. Memento Mori's fine as long as your opponent doesn't draw Mana Dark and useless once your opponent does. Batwing Initiate, this is not the matchup for it. And Botborn Exorcist seems kind of useless. So, I think we have kind of opposite problems, where Gender Terrorist doesn't really feel like they actually have good sideboard options for this matchup, and Anna feels like she has way too many good sideboard options for this matchup. We did see the Spore Flow Protector come in, and we didn't see the Kalia's Abomination go out, which is kind of interesting. Also, Meteor Volleys and Stand Unsaleables. We're down to a mulligan to 5, but having an opening hand with ramp spells and Stand Unassailable is pretty great. I would probably just pitch the Tyrant of Tributes, and maybe you have a lot of mana sources in this hand, so maybe I'd be tempted to pitch one of them. The unfortunate thing is if you do pitch one, you're probably pitching Jobaya, and Jobaya is also a payoff, so that's a little scary. But yeah, we did see Jobaya and Tyrant get dropped. Oh, I didn't notice that there's no green source in this hand. That's scary. We could easily see a brick and die here. Gender Terrorist is currently relying on Distant Thunder as their only discard outlet right now. So I think we're going to see a turn 2, which is fetch a red source and a black source, Distant Thunder, Putrid Lurker. If Anna had drawn a green source there, I think the situation would be a lot better. As is, I'm a little bit worried. I guess we could also technically see Gender Terrorist. Yeah, okay, we're seeing a setup for the turn that I described, I believe. Drawing Earthbreaker Behemoth is nice once the board, once you're able to stabilize life-wise, but there's a big if here, which is if Anna manages to find a green source necessary to cast spells. Which, I mean, Magic is a game with a lot of built-in variance, and that is a incredibly stressful thing when you're playing matches like this. This is only the first match of the tournament, so either player that loses this still has another 4 rounds of Swiss to achieve redemption. But it always is a bad feeling starting a tournament out down. I actually wouldn't, and Gender Terrorist realized this just as I did. You don't actually need to Distant Thunder yet. You can do it on Anna's end step. If Anna fetches for a green source, obviously, but if Anna plays a Dork, well, I think that's probably the better move in a vacuum. Okay, yeah, we're gonna see Farseek. So this decreases the chance that. So the reason I would have been a little bit tempted to do Keen's Devoted is because, summoning sickness, but I guess the land comes in tapped, so it's kind of comparable either way. And the source, putting in a mana source that can't be bolted is probably just much better for the exact reason that I was about to articulate, which is if Anna had played out a Dork and had immediately gotten bolted, that would have sucked. Um, we're also seeing a Fate Shaper come down instead of the land that I was describing. So maybe it's just holding on to the Distant Thunder since it's the only discard outlet right now. That makes a lot of sense, honestly. Um, I also not sure why Anna grabbed a Flourishing Crevasse instead of a Dominion, because tri-lands are better than dual lands. Alright, so Anna drew out of the Mana Screw, so I think we're going to see, just kind of a steamroll from here. Stand unassailable, go up to 23. Even if your Dork dies, you're going to untap next turn and slam the Earthbreaker Behemoth, which, as we saw, has some issues when matching up against a Putrid Lurker, but matches up great against this Fate Shaper. So are we going to see the Distant Thunder, Putrid Lurker, Chupacabra Wombo combo? It's kind of a very strange build your own um, build your own Flame Tongue combo. The fact we didn't see that is shocking to me, but we just immediately got paid off for it. So drawing this Dwarven War Hatchet um, represents a lot of damage. A Distant Thunder plus Dwarven War Hatchet means that Anna could chase just 9 in a single turn. On the other hand, that's your only discard outlet. You have these Putrid Lurkers sitting around in hand. I'm I'm not convinced that's the best line, honestly. At least you get to kill the Keen's Devoted, but yeah, you get to kill the Keen's Devoted, you get to use up all your mana. It's a little soft to this Earthbreaker Behemoth that's in hand, but you have no way of knowing that, or playing around it, really. The Stand Unassailable, I think, helped a lot here. And otherwise be at 10, which is a lot more scary of a life total. But Dwarven War Hatchet on a Putrid Lurker is kind of the stuff of nightmares, since that's an unkillable creature that has double strike and death touch and 4 power, which, has a tendency to be good, I have heard. Um, but Earthbreaker will eat this up, drop GenderTerrorist down to 4 life, and then it's just kind of the top of Anna's deck versus the world at this point. Um, Thankfully, another land does mean that Anna gets to flash back the Stand Unassailable, which will do a lot to continue stabilizing Anna's life total and Anna's board state. And I mean, in general, when you're in a spot where drawing lands is good and drawing non-lands is good, that's kind of the best spot to be in. I think we'll see a Cradle of Corruption played and a Putrid Lurker, if I had to guess. Cradle of Corruption's a really cool card, but this isn't really the matchup for it, since while there are creatures dying, it's not really about the grind. Um, Interesting that Fiery Temper plus Distant Thunder can team up to kill an Earthbreaker Behemoth. I'm pretty sure that's almost never worth it, but it's cool. Drawing a land, as discussed, is great. Should probably shock this in. While that hurts a little bit, you then go immediately back up to 23 life. Um, and I think you need to get the extra body in play because you're in a situation where you need to race this Putrid Lurker. So you're going to attack for 6 this turn, and then attack for 12 the next turn. That's lethal. So GenderTerrorist will need to rip a removal spell that clips the 4 toughness Stand Unassailable, or something that can block, because Putrid Lurkers very much cannot. Anna is going to be taking 8, 11 damage next turn, which is, not nothing, but is only half her life total. So I think we're seeing a lot of the traits of Anna's deck, which I feel are very much linked to how powerful this card is, since Earthbreaker Behemoth is just a monster against any deck that wants to use creatures. So how Stand Unassailable works. Deform Sandy's a good draw here, but it's not good enough. And it has no ways of taking these creatures off the battlefield. And it has GenderTerrorist has no ways of taking these creatures off the battlefield, and no way of surviving the next turn. So I wonder if we'll see a slightly different boarding strategy. I really don't think you want to have the Denethra Oracles in. Maybe they're better on the play. Boarding in the Deform Sandys made sense. I didn't really consider those too much, but Mostly just because I'm not sure what in your main deck is worse, so I'm not sure what you board out. Um, we're seeing slightly more sideboarding from Lotleth Troll / GenderTerrorist, um, which makes sense. Now you have a better sense of how your opponent is going to conduct the game, what your loose states are looking like. Um, Alright, and GenderTerrorist being on the play this game is pretty exciting. Boarding the Batwing Initiates is not something I would have expected, actually. Um, I guess the Death Touch Lifelink is good against Anna's big creatures, but the 1 toughness is kind of a liability. So I'm not sure. Uh, this opening hand is a little bit clunky because you have the Deformed Sanity to ritual out the Lurker, but you don't really want to because you don't have the mana. So it's possible to see Deformed Sanity just to maintain curve purposes and go Deformed Sanity, Batwing Initiate, Dusk Lieutenant, then the following turn discard a card, recur, Putrid Lurker. Um, and honestly, Anna's hand is kind of held together here by this Farseek. Otherwise, you're just playing out 3 lands and hoping to hit the 4th and 5th ones, which is why I really like leaving a Heart of Zadina or Nareba in the sideboard of Epic Encounter decks, because if Epic Encounter can fail case as a draw land, that's great. Also kept in the Cullies Abominations. I think I commented on that last game, but I'm not sure. Um, if you're looking at this hand, it's really easy to hyper-focus on just how unbeatable Earthbreaker Behemoth looks. It's same for Cullies Abomination, basically. But I really think you can't afford to take either of those, because you need to slow Anna's roll down. Because Anna just can draw more threats. Um, took the Earthbreaker Behemoth, which makes a lot of sense. Or makes sense. I think if you're not going to take the Farseek, the Earthbreaker is the next best option. But I think now we're just going to see turn 2 Farseek, turn 3 Epic Encounter, maybe turn 4 Kali's Abomination, which might be a little too slow against the relatively fast draw from GenderTerrorist. But I kind of doubt it. I also think I mentioned earlier why I didn't really like did throw Oracle in this matchup, and I think it's really showing that. Void Flare can kill off this Batwing Initiate before it becomes a pest, but doing so is at the cost of Farseek, so you don't want to do that this turn. You can still tag it next turn before it gets its 3rd toughness. And actually, even if it did, it gets its 3rd point of toughness at the same time as you get your 3rd point of burn from Void Flare. And again, grabbing the Nomad's Township, I'm just really not sure why we're not seeing Dominion being grabbed here. Maybe it's to keep fetches better in the mid to late game. That seems unlikely, but I think we'll see a Dusk Lieutenant, and Dusk Lieutenant into Dusk Lieutenant is fairly exciting, actually, especially because you get the first Dusk Lieutenant down before your opponent has the Kali's Abomination, then you get the second one, and you can instantly make your opponent discard 2 cards, which, depending on how Anna plays this next turn, could be kind of devastating. Like, if Anna is forced to discard a land in Kali's Abomination, that's kind of GG. Which might mean we'll see the Void Flare go at the Dusk Lieutenant instead of at the Batwing Initiate. It seems a little bit unlikely, but... And that's kind of the perfect draw here. This solves all of your problems immediately. Just add more Hellion. So Hellion eats the Dusk Lieutenant, it can now block the Batwing Initiate, even if it trades, that's fine. Kali's Abomination can come down next turn and clean up the scraps. The nut draw here is a land. Putrid Lurker's pretty good, because you can discard Putrid Lurker, put 2 Putrid Lurkers onto the battlefield. I think you can't fuck around with this Duskwatch. This not Duskwatch Lieutenant. That's a different magic card. This Dusk Lieutenant. As tempting as the Siren Song of Value might be, I really think you can't. You need to put more bodies on the board right now. Dusk Lieutenant just gets eaten cleanly by another top-decked Earthbreaker Behemoth or any removal spells your opponent might have. Better just utilize the Putrid Lurkers. But GenderTerrorist disagrees with me. We're going to see the Dusk Lieutenant come down. It's possible we're going to see the first of the Omens cracked. And is going to have Anna discard a card. Discarding Epic Encounter, though, is kind of what we'd expect. And Anna can now just curve this into Grim Bastion, Kali's Abomination, take your last 2 cards. Now you're top decking versus a board of like 8 power. Um, Getting the Batwing Initiate to fly is kind of nice because the Hellion very much does not have flying. So this going up to being a 3/3, gaining some more life. There's there's some solid stuff going on here. Or sorry, gaining 2 life. Um, Stand Unassailable is interesting. So now you can actually keep the board in check while Stand Unassailabling. Um, I think you still want a Kalia's Abomination, just take out the last 2 cards from hand, but I would be a little bit tempted otherwise at this point. Um, Kalia's Abomination dying also is pretty good, um, but GenderTerrorist still has the ability to you know, draw the 3rd Putrid Lurker, put all 3 onto the battlefield, um, and just the Death Touch on Putrid Lurker lines up so well against everything that Anna is doing. Like Death Touch, meaning that your big creatures that you sunk all this time and energy into are still just trading, is really rough. It's possible that with his Stand Unassailable waiting in the wings, you should attack with a Hellion Devastator. Um, that might sound a little crazy, but you also do need this game to end because, well, you have a scary late game. In the immediate term, you're under a lot more pressure and danger. Um, though I guess since you're about to lose this Void Flare to Dust Lieutenant trigger, you should not give up your ability to use creatures as a defense. All right, yeah, we're gonna see a Stand Unassailable discarded. That's interesting, huh? Drawing another Batwing Initiate is pretty nice here. Drawing it's a little bit awkward because you actually did want to draw before the Kalia's Abomination died. Um, and I think you do want to pay 4 life to make the Batwing Initiate fly to force the Kalia's Abomination block. Uh, but I'm not sure, like, that's a kind of small distinction. I'm not sure it matters. Um, I definitely want to just attack with both the creatures I can legally attack with if I'm GenderTerrorist right now. Um, Maybe you don't. I think you do still want to pay the 4 life because it's actually just paying 1 life. And just being able to force. I guess the blocks are favorable either way. One has 4 power, one has Death Touch. So it really doesn't matter. Yeah, it would have been wrong for me to pay 4 life there. I would have just,
I guess we'll see soon if the so the decision not to block there is fairly interesting. I'm not sure. I mean, so you take an extra 4 damage this turn. You keep a blocker next turn, but you don't want
Putrid Lurkers anyway. So that's a little bit suspect to me. We'll see how well this 10 to the Grove hits, since it can definitely kind of high roll here. Yeah, that's the high roll actually. Um, Gaining 7 life while continuing to 10 to the Grove, still having this Void Flare in your back pocket. Now you're at 19. Your opponent does have 10 power on the board, but you can take 4 of that off with a single spell. So it's kind of stupid. You don't want to block with this Hellion Devastator, so yeah, getting in makes sense. Gets your opponent on a 3-turn clock, and you're winning this race. Like you're on a 4-turn clock, your opponent's on a 3-turn clock, um, assuming that you're gonna kill the Dust Lieutenant, which I think is very advisable. Drawing a land here is not quite what you want. It's not technically the worst. You do need to bank cards in hand. Hitting your 4th land is not bad in GenderTerrorist deck, but I think things are going sideways right now. From GenderTerrorist perspective, if your opponent doesn't have the removal spell and you attack with your full board, you have them on a 2-turn clock. Your opponent has you on a 2-turn clock. So it's actually since you're taking your game actions first, you should attack with everything. Uh, but the decision to keep a creature back makes some amount of sense. It's just not going to work out particularly well here. And if Anna draws a land, there's 2 Stand Unassailable to flash back, or Spore Flow Protector. That works great. Spore Flow Protector is one of the cleanest answers you have to Putrid Lurker, partially because it. Oh no, there's lethal on board. I also forgot there was a Rousing Rubble there. And that's also why GenderTerrorist kept a creature back. Very well played on Anna's part, and also well played on GenderTerrorist's part. I would have just died there for 0 reason. Um, so the first strike combined with the Hellion Devastator means a clean win for Anna there, and that was a very close set. Best of 3. We got a 2-1 match. That was great, kicking off Grand Prix Rome with a bang. Thank you all for listening. and watching, and hopefully the quality of casting goes up substantially over the course of this Grand Prix.